Today's episode of Desertwood Days with Kathy Blaze is sponsored by Cole Obarts Entertainment, providing amusement, celebration, and distraction since 2013. To find out more, visit us on the web at www.coleobartsent.com.
Welcome back to Desertwood Days, and I am your host, Kathy Blaze. Today, I'd like to welcome award-winning journalist and author, Mr. Mike Watkiss.
What a pleasure.
Such an
Great to
honor
see you.
have you.
Thank you, Kathy. It's
Good,
nice
good,
to be
good.
here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for joining us today. Well, I have a lot to talk to you about today.
I should fasten my seatbelt.
No, it's going to be fun. You know, I love to Netflix and chill, as they say.
Right.
But before I get to that, I want to just go backwards in your history of work. You have a amazingly huge resume.
Well, you're kind to say. I look back and it looks like it's sort of a chaotic mess sometimes.
But for us looking at you, it was amazing. I remember watching you on television and hearing your name. It was amazing.
Well, I honestly feel like I have been the luckiest guy in the world because I'm sort of an adrenaline junkie. I like adventure. I like action. And I found a job that paid me to do that. And it ended up being sent all over, as we were discussing. Really got to go all over the world covering some fairly significant events in history during the last 40, half century, really.
Yes, decades of being a journalist. But you know what?
That just means I'm old, is what that
No.
means. Is what that means,
That
Kathy.
just means you're experienced.
Yeah.
I want to know a little bit about the pre-journalist Mike. What was that young Mike like?
Wow. That's so far ago, long ago. I'm not sure. I was the third of three boys in a family. So my poor mother had nothing but three rowdy sons, and I was sort of the tail end of that. And
Sounds like my brother. My mom had three boys, and then she got me.
Okay, a blessing at the end there, but so it was just a fairly ordinary. Grew up in Salt Lake City, and nothing really remarkable about it. Just a crazy kid trying to figure out a path in life, but real good family and nice brothers. And
what inspired journalists?
I could tell you a long story. My father was a GI in World War II and basically found himself, fighting Nazis in frozen trenches of Europe. And he came back from that experience, and he so admired the coverage of Edward R. Murrow and some of the early journalists covering the events he was in. And he said if he ended up being a lawyer, but my father frequently said when I was a child, if he could do it again, he would have been one of Murrow's boys covering it. And that's, and then for people who know the ancient history of television news, Edward R. Murrow was sort of the founding father of what we know as modern news and whatever it's morphed into today. And hearing my father, his admiration of the reporters covering, war correspondents covering the war he was in. So I know that had an impact on me, and I like adventure, and when troubles happen, and I like to run towards it.
You want to run towards it. And speaking of running towards it, you ran towards a lot of things. We were speaking earlier about you being on tours of following Michael Jackson.
It's been a couple of years.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was that was one of the crazier times of my sort of crazy career. When the first allegations of inappropriate behavior were leveled against Michael Jackson. L.A. Times drops the story. I'm working for a TV show called A Current Affair at the time, running their L.A. bureau. This massive story drops, this young man making the allegations against Michael Jackson. Jackson's midway on his tour, the Dangerous Tour,
Mm.
worldwide tour. Amazing
I
production.
bet it was.
They're in Singapore at the time the news drops, and suddenly it thinks, is Michael Jackson going to get arrested? Is this tour going to fall apart? So I ended up jumping on a plane at LAX with none other than Elizabeth Taylor, the famous Academy Award winning actress, who was Michael's dear friend, and
Yeah.
interviewed. She was not very happy about it, but interviewed Elizabeth Taylor on the airplane flying over to Singapore, and,
You just ambushed her on the airplane.
I ambushed Elizabeth Taylor in the first class cabin of a Singapore Airlines jet, much to the consternation of Miss Taylor, her really nasty bodyguard, and the pilots. But whatever we would have been arrested today in today's world,
Yeah.
post 9/11, and if we would have been arrested for what we. But basically, we got an interview with Elizabeth Taylor, got to Singapore, started covering the Michael Jackson story, and ended up became friends with the promoter of the thing, and went to two of his epic concerts
Awesome.
in Singapore, soccer stadium with 100,000 people, crazy fans
That's
in it,
amazing.
and watching this production of Jackson, really, I've never seen an entertainment vehicle so epic. It was amazing to see.
Wow. And some of us have never gotten to see
Well,
Michael in
and
concert,
that's
so that's just amazing.
Yeah, as a live performer, really just
Yeah.
unparalleled for his generation, and who knows, he's really an amazing talent. And a weird story, and we ended up following Michael to Europe
Mm.
and spending a long time in London and then in Mexico. So it became a global sort of following Michael, what's going to happen as these charges and this story sort of unfolded.
Out of all the things that you've done, I mean, let's not get into the book yet, but what is one of your most memorable moments? I mean, one that you one that you could be at home and just think about, or just find yourself thinking about.
Well, you know what? Unfortunately, there's a number of those demons that sort of come up in my head periodically. But the little moments. One of the first stories when I was a young reporter in Salt Lake City, we saw an old man and a young boy in a covered wagon on the side of a freeway. And my cameraman and I were driving to some other event, and we said, if that guy's still there when we get done, we got to stop by and talk. And I would probably, within the first couple of years of my career, it still maybe is my favorite story. It's just a man and his son sort of trying to live off the grid in a covered wagon. And they were wonderful and sweet. And the old man said at the end of the story, he said, the only thing we leave behind is our footprints.
Oh.
And to this day, it's still one of the most. And it was just the story of a father and son. And I'll tell you that being a father, covering so many horrific events, often I sort of find myself looking through the prism of a father, and what the difference a good father and a bad father can make in a person's in a kid's life. And you cover these stories, and again, it's just sort of a perspective that I found myself often looking at. What were the father figures in this story, and what was the role they played? And it's often so profound. But this was just a beautiful father-son story, and it spoke to me then.
Sometimes it's just those small, those sweet moments.
Those
it doesn't have to be this big glamorized thing. It's just something about this.
Those are the things that stay with me.
Yes.
The moments where you've actually meet somebody. There's not a lot of pretense, and the mystery of the camera. You're actually just really talking to somebody and getting down to sort of a real sort of soul to soul level, so to speak.
Right. I mean, there's no dramatics about it. It's life. It's real life.
Those are the most interesting moments. But the theatrics of big press conferences and chasing celebrities, that's certainly part of the game too. And I won't deny it. I did plenty of that as well.
So you were a journalist for years and retired.
I did, yeah.
So the next thing you stepped into was writing your memoir?
Well, I can tell you that many of the stories in my memoir, I started writing years ago. I had been writing for decades. Some of the events are sort of traumatic incidents that I experienced or saw that I wasn't really sure, can I explain what really happened to myself? And some of them are, sort of just amusing anecdotes about some of the crazy characters. I'm sitting face to face with the notorious Night Stalker serial killer Richard
Right.
Ramirez in a little jail cell in San Francisco. Pretty fiery moment, and I talk about that. They're just, but a lot of them again focus on stories that I was experienced behind the stories, and some of the the crazy things that we
Right.
went through, that I went through, yeah, it's a mishmash chaos. If anybody's expecting some sort of walk in the park, I recommend they read this book late at night during a thunderstorm with the lights flickering.
Well,
That's the right environment.
right. We want them to go out and buy it and read it for themselves, but just to ask you, was this written from Mike's perspective, or was it written from the other person's perspective?
Well, it's all my, I'm not smart enough to really figure out what other people think. So this is pretty a straight recitation. I dedicated it to my children. It's to my daughter Dylan and my son Colt, because in many ways, when I started pulling this together, and I wasn't sure I was going to get a book together, but I wanted to leave them some written history, why they're some mea culpa. To my children, why their father was so crazy. And this was
Right.
but they've been, my kids and my wife are really the things that have kept me sane over the
I'm
years,
sure.
facing a lot of stuff.
I'm sure. So we were speaking about your memoir, and how how did you decide on what you were going to put in there? Because I mean, you had 40 years of work there, so how hard was that to decide on that?
Well, again, many of them sort of laid themselves out as just sort of essays to myself, again, trying to figure out. There was when I ended up covering murder and mayhem for much of my career, but I went back to the moment when I was first sort of introduced to that kind of violence, and I was a kid working as a gardener at a strip mall, at a mall in Salt Lake City, and a man was just sort of randomly shot, and I was right there and ended up sort of having to clean up the mess afterwards. And as a 14-year-old, you sort of blew it off and thought that was a weird experience. But did it have an impact on the trajectory of my career? I write about that moment, seeing my first killing.
Mm,
Ended up covering enough killings to fill up a big city cemetery.
right.
So I became familiar with those kind of things. And some of it is my own personal exorcism, trying to get these demons out of me. I'm
Right,
not going to
right.
lie to you.
So,
Some
okay,
is
so with
psychotherapy.
that being said, what other things did you do for your own self care?
I had a
To
really good family. I'll tell you,
oh,
that's what's kept me. And
okay.
I don't write this book, and I say this in it. I'm not asking. It's not like I want any sort of sympathy.
Oh, of
This
course.
was utterly
Oh,
self-inflicted. I wanted to do all of
yeah,
this stuff,
yeah.
and if I had it to do over again, I hopefully would do it better. But I would do it
Right.
again.
Well, speaking of wanting to do that,
Yeah,
let's talk about the Netflix
yeah.
documentary that's out right now that you're a part of.
Right.
Let's talk a little about that,
Yeah,
about
yeah.
wanting to do that because you were all over that.
The Warren Jeffs saga and the covering the fundamentalist folks up on the border, it definitely occupied the largest chunk of my career for any single issue. And I covered it for most of my life. I grew up in Utah and was aware of that. But yeah, so that the
Did you
Netflix
have to cover that because you grew up
I
in Utah?
covered.
I mean, that was something you wanted to do because of
I
that
sort
reason. It
of
was
I felt
personal.
yeah
Okay.
I mean came from a Mormon background and
Oh,
had polygamous ancestors, and so does
wow.
my wife. So I felt like I had some sort of knowledge about what was what the truth behind the prairie dress,
Uh,
pastoral, all
mhm.
sweetness and light image. There was some definite problems, and that ended up occupying more of my career than I care to even think about. But some months ago, some folks from Netflix, or some producers came to me, and they produced a documentary called "Keep Sweet, Pray
Mhm.
and Obey,"
Mhm.
and I was just sort of a hired hand for that. They wanted to do an interview with me, and I shared some of my work. But the people, Rachel Dretzen is the woman who produced it. I think they did a really good job.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I'd love to hear your read on that.
Yes, I tell you one thing, that keep sweet thing just creeped me out.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know what, that is the typical way of luring young people in.
Well,
I mean,
grooming, yeah, no
yes,
doubt,
yes,
manipulating.
yes. I think they did a great job of putting it all together. The production, I mean, everything.
Right. And then when I talked to them early, because I'm now part of history in that
Mm-hmm.
story, and my part should be history. It's in the
Yes.
rearview mirror, and that town should go on. But to the extent I'm part of history, I would think it's important that when the story's told, it's not some knight in shining armor, not
Right.
some a private investigator or famous author
Right.
who saved that or brought about these changes. It was a series a couple of generations of very powerful, very
Mm.
tough women who got out and fought like hell. So
Right.
what happened to them would not happen to their brothers and sisters.
Right. Right.
And so, I'm glad that in Keep Sweet they focus on 4 or 5 of the young women who are sort of this current, the latest generation that really brought down Warren Jeffs.
Mm.
But I would say and I think that these women would acknowledge they sort of stood on the shoulders of a number of women who came before them, who started this fight and really put this terrible man in prison and got a federal ruling at a court in Phoenix that will
Mm.
forever change the control of that
Right.
town for the better.
Right.
And the only people that really deserve the credit are a bunch of tough women who
Yes.
stood up and
Yes.
fought.
Yes.
And
They
that's
do.
I hope that's the message. And I think the producers of that
I think they did a great
produced.
job of bringing that across too.
And
Yes.
that's the truth. I mean,
Yes.
that's the truth of the story, and I think they did it as well. I think they did
I
a good
totally
job.
agree. And again, thank you for your part in that.
Well, again, it was
Thank you
fun.
for
I
your
probably
part.
would have done it without any pay, because and
Yeah.
if we had any impact in helping somebody, making somebody's life better, that is
Of
reward
course.
enough for me.
And that's what we're all here for.
Yeah,
I mean,
I hope
whether
that,
it's
I hope that's the
yes,
case. Yeah.
yes, I think that's what we're all here for, is to help to make someone's life better. I think art helps to make someone's life better.
I totally concur.
I totally agree. So we have your memoir, but you're retired as a journalist. You're also you're an actor.
I've done some, yeah, but that's kind of, I hope I am. You watch some of my performances before you throw that out and say, but I've recently I've done a number of films over the years, started many years ago.
So what got you the desire to get in front of the camera and be an actor?
Because I feel like it's just sort of what I do.
Okay.
So I think that there are people who have sort of a genetic deficiency or something, and they're sort of
You
natural
said, "Come
born
on, Mike, with those pretty green eyes and get in front of the camera."
Well, it's just really more like a circus performer. You're always looking for, I don't know. I love to act, and I was acting when I was a child. I did my first TV commercial when I was a little kid, because for an insurance or loan company, and they needed some family struggling over their bills with a kid with braces on his teeth. So I did a big grin with braces on my teeth. That was my first acting gig when I was about 11.
Do you find that because of your history of things that you've done, you're sort of getting pigeonholed in certain types of roles,
Well, I think my appearance probably pigeonholes me more than anything, and
Oh.
again, that's sort of self-inflicted. At my age, I'm not going to get the leading man roles, so
You
I've
never
sort
know.
of, well, I've sort of, I figure that I have the look of sort of the sinister bad guy, the cowboy, the biker. So I got a couple of arrows in my quiver, but I'm happy for whatever roles I get.
Okay. Well,
Love to work. That's what it is.
yes,
I love to work.
yes. Well, congratulations.
And we
on
may
that.
work on something in the future, but
Yes.
I guess that may be
Yes.
something I probably shouldn't be bringing
Yeah.
up.
Well, no, we can bring it out. I believe in putting things in the universe.
Yeah, well, let's get to a film that we may do some not too distant future. It'd be
Yes.
great. I'd love that.
So you're also you have a YouTube channel and podcast that you're working on with your daughter as well.
Right, when when the book came out, my daughter was home in the COVID. She was in college and playing basketball, but she came home for a while. So we had some downtime, and instead of driving each other crazy, we decided to do a YouTube channel called Story Hustler, and it examines many of the same stories that we talk about in the book. And she and I yuck it up a little bit, having a
Right.
guest every now and
And
then.
that's the perfect thing to do. I mean, you have the hard copy.
Yeah.
You need to also be promoting in other ways and putting that content out there because you know a lot of people. There's people today that don't like to read.
This is the brave new world. Yeah, I mean, I was an old
Yes.
TV guy. I thought I'd put something on television. That's all I did. But you're right.
Yes.
There's so many avenues now to sort of disseminate information.
This looks really creepy. You know that.
Well,
You know.
again, late at night with the lights flickering and lightning outside. That's the best environment to read it by
Yes.
candle, I think.
Yes.
So you already got a good start here.
Yes. So I love that idea that you're doing a podcast. So how are you guys? Are you guys taking a chapter and maybe talking about
That's
a
exactly
chapter?
what it is. Just sit down and we've done something on Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. We've talked about 9/11. You know when the planes hit and I headed back to New York, which was a profound and jarring experience. Again, it's little moments. One time sitting outside in L.A. County Jail waiting for the actor Marlon Brando to bail his son out after the son had killed a man. And again, it was a father's story, and it was probably the one time I will ever have an interaction with Brando. But I have a big voice, and he whisked his son out, and I shouted a couple of questions, and he stopped. And I got a couple of questions, and I'm thinking it's my one and only opportunity to share a little scene with Brando, but it was again also the father dimension of it.
Right.
Whatever his stature, this was a man whose son was in deep trouble, and you could tell that's all that mattered. He was trying to save his child.
I love hearing how important for you that it was that family dynamic, that parent to child dynamic that you sought out and you noticed in a lot of these areas.
Yeah, and I don't know why, but I think it's being a dad, really.
Yes.
It made me think about it. But those were people. I covered lots of bad things, and most of them I've forgotten unless they involve children.
So what's next for Mike Watkiss?
I'm just grateful to be here this morning. I don't make a lot of plans in the future. I've got a movie that I hear maybe in a good film festival soon. I'm psyched about that. There's a movie that's playing out now called Some Nudity Required.
Okay.
A little racy, but I play sort of a funny role in that. It's my first sort of overt comedy.
Good.
And so
we
that
get
was,
to see the funny part.
Well, I'll wait till you see it. You may be booing and throwing popcorn. But anyhow, just whatever comes my way.
That is awesome. So where can our audience find you?
Well, it depends on if they're friend or foe.
I know.
But you get the book on Amazon, hardback and paperback and ebook, and I just sort of look for me in coffee shops and dark corners. I'll be hanging around somewhere.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Oh,
today
it's so nice to talk to you. It's so nice to meet, and I'm looking forward to that film we're going to do.
Yes. And thank you for joining us here today at Desertwood Days.